In this section, we will talk about the long bone that makes up the arm and named humerus. The humerus is the bone of the arm. It is the longest bone of the upper limb. Proximally, the humeral head articulates with the glenoid cavity to form the glenohumeral joint, while the distal end of the humerus articulates with the radius and ulna distally to form the elbow joint. It has an upper rounded end, a lower flattened end, and a shaft. The upper end is rounded to form the head. The lower end is expanded from side to side and flattened from before backwards. So the bone can be divided into three parts as upper end, shaft, and lower end. Let's look at them more closely. Upper end. The head is directed medially, backwards and upwards. It articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula to form the shoulder joint. The head forms about 1/3 of a sphere and is much larger than the glenoid cavity. The line separating the head from the rest of the upper end is called the anatomical neck. You can find two tubercles on the posterior aspect of the bone. The lesser tubercle is an elevation on the anterior aspect of the upper end. The greater tubercle is an elevation that forms the lateral part of the upper end. Its upper and posterior aspect is marked by three impressions: upper, middle, and lower. The intertubercular sulcus or bicipital groove separates the lesser tubercle from the greater tubercle. The narrow line separating the upper end of the humerus from the shaft is called the surgical neck. Now let's talk about the shaft of humerus. The shaft is rounded in the upper half and triangular in the lower half. It has three borders and three surfaces. First, let's talk about the borders of shaft of humerus. Anterior border. The upper 1/3 of the anterior border forms the lateral lip of the intertubercular sulcus. That is, the space between greater and lesser tubercle. As for the lower half of the anterior border is smooth and rounded. In its middle part, it forms the anterior margin of the deltoid tuberosity. Medial border. Its upper end forms the medial lip of the intertubercular sulcus. It is continuous below with the medial supracondylar ridge. A ridge is a non-articulating eminence on the bone. Lateral border. The upper part of the lateral border is less prominent as compared to the lower end that forms the lateral supracondylar ridge. Now that we have talked about the borders of humerus, it will be easier for you to locate the surfaces. The three surfaces are anterolateral surface, which lies between the anterior and lateral border as shown here. The V-shaped deltoid tuberosity is the identifying marks of the anterolateral surface. Anteromedial surface lies between the anterior and medial borders. Its upper 1/3 is narrow and forms the floor of the intertubercular sulcus. Posterior surface lies between the medial and lateral borders. Its upper part is marked by an oblique ridge. The middle 1/3 is crossed by the radial groove. That is all about the three borders and surfaces of the shaft of humerus. Let's look at the lower end of this long bone. The lower or distal end of the humerus forms the condyle, which is expanded from side to side and has articular and non-articular parts. First, let's look at the articulating parts. The capitulum is a rounded projection which articulates with the head of the radius. The trochlea is a pulley-shaped surface. It articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulna. The medial edge of the trochlea projects down more than the lateral edge. This results in the formation of the carrying angle. You can remember it as that the word trochlea is a Greek word meaning pulley. A mnemonic to remember this fact at elbow joint: crimson tulips. the capitulum articulating with the head of the radius, whereas the trochlea articulates with the ulna. Now let's look at the non-articulating parts of the humerus. The medial epicondyle is a prominent bony projection on the medial side of the lower end. It is subcutaneous and is easily felt on the medial side of the elbow, whereas the lateral epicondyle is smaller than the medial epicondyle. Its anterolateral part has a muscular impression. There are also 3 fossas on the distal end of humerus. At the anterior aspect, there are 2 of the 3 fossas. The coronoid fossa is a depression just above the anterior aspect of the trochlea. It accommodates the coronoid process of the ulna when the elbow is flexed. The radial fossa is a depression present just above the anterior aspect of the capitulum. It accommodates the head of the radius when the elbow is flexed. And last fossa of the humeral bone is at the posterior aspect, called as the olecranon fossa. It accommodates the olecranon process of the ulna when the elbow is extended. As humerus is the largest bone of the upper limb and forms 2 joints, several muscles are attached to it that allow the movement of the arm. The origin and insertion sites of muscles. We will look at the muscular attachments with respects to part of the bone. Proximal end. If you remember the greater tubercle, over here there are 3 smooth and flat impressions present at the posterior-superior aspect for muscle attachments. If we go from the superior to the inferior aspect, the muscles that attach at these impressions are the SIT or SID, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor. Coming to the lateral aspect of the greater tubercle, we have the deltoid muscle covering it. This results in the normal rounded shape of the shoulder. On the lesser tubercle, there is an attachment point for subscapularis muscle. The intertubercular sulcus consists of a lateral lip and a medial lip. The tendon of the pectoralis major muscle attaches onto the lateral lip, while the teres major tendon attaches onto the medial lip. In addition, the tendon of latissimus dorsi attaches to the posterior aspect. As for the muscles at the shaft of humerus, the deltoid inserts into the deltoid tubercle around the middle of the surface. From the distal part, the lateral portion of the brachialis muscle originates. Coming to the anteromedial surface of the humerus, it provides attachment for the coracobrachialis muscle around its mid-portion. Now the triceps brachii muscle is attached via its medial head to the posterior surface, and the lateral head is attached to the ridge in the proximal third. As for the muscles at the distal end, the muscle attachments at the distal end dictate the movement of the anterior and posterior compartments of the forearm. The medial epicondyle provides attachment of superficial muscles of the anterior forearm. These muscles are the flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, flexor carpi radialis, pronator teres. If you remember in the last section, we discussed that there is an impression on the lateral epicondyle, which provides attachment to the 7 muscles. These include the brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, extensor carpi ulnaris, and anconeus. All these 7 muscles are a part of the superficial group of the posterior compartment of the forearm. The muscles of the arm are divided into compartments, so they are easier to remember. We will talk about the muscles of the arm in a much more detail in a separate video along with its innervation and movements. That ends our lecture on humerus. Stay tuned to learn about the bones of forearm.
Explore our extensive library of over 1,800 video lectures to learn about a wide range of topics. Only on sqadia.com.